Hello everybody, Thy Lord Root here, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program. Or rather, Kerbal Aerospace Program, because in this series, we're actually going to do just airplanes. At least for the most part. I might, put up some targets with the rocket, but, I figured that, when I was flying my planes last, I found that, I'm not very good at flying planes. It's something that I need to work on. And so maybe we'll do experiments of sorts. We're going to go sandbox mode because I really don't feel like working through career mode at the moment. And we could use Ferrum Aerospace. However, I'm going to go with stock Kerbal physics for now because Ferrum Aerospace does change a lot of things. So we'll just do, make sure we're here, Kerbal Aerospace. And we'll start now. So, my first gut reaction is to click on the VAB. That's not where we're going. We're going to go to the spaceplane hangar. And just like in my past few episodes, or my past few series involving Kerbal Space Program, I'm going to build up the planes for the first couple of episodes, and then maybe import them later. But I just want to go about the process of building a plane right now. So we're just going to go with the regular cockpit, and we will call this, I don't know, the Alpha Flyer. Not like the Delta Flyer. This one remains in the Alpha Quadrant, of course. So, I'm going to make a fairly lightweight plane, and you might ask, how do we go about that? Well, there are lots of things we can do here. We can, of course, make this a rocket plane. That might be interesting. We could put this big rocket, this solid rocket booster on there, but then again, we might not want to do that. Instead, what I think we'll do is we'll put on a jet fuel and just make a regular jet, because rocket planes are interesting, and we'll build some for sure, but they're not strictly necessary, I don't think. And so I've been thinking a little bit about how we can design this thing. I think the design isn't too terribly bad on my planes, it's just how I fly them. I tend to fly them very aggressively. What I've learned from looking into this is that the best way to design the plane is to bring up your center of mass here and make sure that when we put on our wings, and what wings we'll put on, I'm not quite sure yet. Why don't we put on these, maybe these, delta wings here. We want our wings to be as close to the center of mass as possible. And we want to make sure that whenever this thing runs out of fuel, we're close to it, that our center of mass becomes stable. So what's likely to happen, because these fuel tanks drain from the bottom to the top, is we're going to first lose this engine here, or this tank. They'll move the center of mass back. And so at that point, we want to make this, oops, well, that wasn't intended. We want to make this so that whenever this thing completely drains, that the wings are roughly stable. And so I think the best thing we can do here is design for this case. Since the center of mass seems to be moving backwards, why don't we, at least when that front fuel tank drains, why don't we do this to where we put the center of mass just behind, or the center of lift just behind the center of mass. Then when we increase this it'll remain so. Now we're going to have to adjust that because we're going to have to put control surfaces on as well. And so one way we can approach that is we can just put these elevators on here. And we want a tailplane to stabilize this thing, otherwise it's going to want to roll all about. And we might as well choose one with a rudder built in so that we get yaw control. Now there's really two ways we could approach this. We could, one way is that we could put a single tailplane on, and that will basically give us, vertical stabilization. Or I could do something different. I'm going to try putting two tailplanes on because it looks pretty nifty that way. And the idea there, of course, is that we will want to angle these things up. I'll just re-grab that. We want to angle these things up a little bit. And it would probably help if I use the proper controls for them. I think this will do it for us. And so we want to get these relatively vertical. This may come back in the end to bite me in the ass, but that'll be fine. And then we're going to want a landing gear on here as well. So what I'll do is I'll go to the utility section, not the science section. I'll grab my landing gear. And I'm going to put my landing gear on my wings, I think. Give ourselves a little bit of a tricycle landing gear. And while we're at it, why don't we, well, what's going on here? Yeah, we'll just do that. We might want to move that back a little bit. That engine's at risk if we do it that way. Then again, it could be interesting if we left it that way, so I might just go ahead and do that. And then what we'll do up here is we'll turn this thing around so that we have the maximum in terms of our, lift. We want this to maybe be at a 15-degree angle. And if I can get that thing on there, we'll do that. I think that's a little bit too high up personally, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, we don't want these things to be too low to the ground. That seems about level, actually. But, we're also going to want to put some intakes on here. I'm just going to go with the radial intakes, I think, because, they're pretty nifty, and we can... I think the way we'll approach this is we'll do this just like so. It looks a little bit ugly that way, but then again, I'm not really that bothered by it. So let's make sure that we've got this thing, settled out here. If we raise our fuel, our center of mass is slightly ahead, and then when we drain this fuel, our center of mass moves back forward. So that's something then that we can look forward to. Another thing I want to do here on these tailplanes is I'm going to I'm gonna set the, just set them for y'all. And just set these guys for, pitch and roll. And so, that may be everything. We may want to... I'm gonna throw on a solar panel, I think. At least a couple. Let's see how that doesn't significantly change our center of mass. We don't want to be losing control while we're flying this thing. And maybe what I'll do here, I'll move this thing a little bit closer in. We get a slight elevation. Not too much, but we do want this thing to be relatively elevated, because that way it'll be easier for us to lift off. It'll just sort of take off on its own, so let's give this one a go. And of course, before I fly my plane, I'm gonna crack open a beer. And so while that is loading, we'll just we'll bring KSP back up. I guess I should have been checking to see if the video was going initially, but we're back. And why don't we'll put on the brakes here and we'll just turn on the engines. Now, there's no real guarantee as to whether or not... Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to change the steering on this. This thing could actually be in a bit of trouble if I'm not careful. Oh, we'll just fly it as is. It will give us some power. And I think now's probably the time for us to do this. Hopefully it's not unstable. That is peculiar. I'm not exactly sure what happened there. Well, that was a bit anticlimactic. Let me go back to the spaceplane center and figure out what happened. It must have been because my wheels were locked, I must imagine, or maybe this thing is a little bit too high up off the ground. Oh, we'll just do that. I think that will give us a little bit of elevation. Now, one thing I want to do for landing is I want to lock the steering and I want to disable the brakes. Maybe this thing will have an easier time getting up. Well, let's give that a shot. I'm not gonna bother putting on the brakes this time, but we'll try to get underway. I don't know at how much. I think we're about level actually. Now this thing probably will have to get to the end of the runway in order to take off, because there's no fulcrum on the landing gear. Now why don't we make... Whoa, what is happening? I'm turning the wrong way. Well, that's not a very good start. We'll go into cockpit view here. That is very bad placement for my intakes. have almost no visibility whatsoever. Let's try, let's try turning a little bit. This thing does have a little bit of difficulty turning. I think they all do. I'm just not very good at at turning, I suppose. So I want to turn instantly. Better bring the gear up. I'm not exactly sure if this design is viable to begin with, but let's see where our stall speed is, or our stall angle. I'm hoping that our stall angle is fairly, you know, fairly high. I mean, we can, by the looks of it, we can go directly up, and the plane goes more or less where I want it to go, which is pretty nice. Let's try. I can even go above 45 degrees. It's pretty interesting. Now, I don't know if that's because I have the engine there helping me or what. However, we do have a relatively, a decent, stall angle. I mean, I'm not stalling at all. Now, I probably will, if I cut this engine, I probably will stall. Maybe. Let's see how our gliding performance is. Because actually, this thing is pretty stable. We'll, we'll try to keep this thing going. Now maybe we can try to land this thing as well. We'll give it a shot. Getting lined up is always a little bit, hard for me on this runway. I think part of it is that I'm playing with the keyboard. Is my engine still going? That's really weird. I'm gonna shut that engine down. It says I'm not using fuel. But one of the things I've noticed is that y'all tends to cause problems. And I'm sort of in this weird, I'm not in a nosedive per se, but I am lacking a little bit of control. I guess we'll have to shut our engine down to get the full effect out of this. Oh, it's finally gone off. Or maybe I should just level out just a little bit. And we'll attempt to land this thing. What has happened to Jebediah Kerman? He's all of a sudden turned black. Well, we'll just coast for now, I think. Nothing interesting of note yet. I guess aside from Jebediah Kerman's graphics getting corrupted for some reason or another. And so usually whenever I try to make a landing, one of two things happens. Either I miss the runway completely, or whenever I try to turn, I end up putting myself in an uncontrolled spin. Neither one of those is really what I want. And I've done landings before. I've just never done them well. Every time I attempt to land an aircraft, it inevitably ends up blowing up in my face. And I don't know if it's just that I picked the wrong time to cut my engines. That could be part of it. I think another part of it is that, again, I'm way too aggressive, especially with the bigger planes. These planes are actually not too bad to fly from somebody who's not a pilot. I mean, somebody who actually was a pilot would probably be like, dude, you've lost your mind. I mean, these planes aren't otherwise bad. I mean, the main issue, of course, is getting these things turned around quickly, and I'm not exactly sure what the best approach for that is. For that matter, I'm not even sure how much clearance I need to turn. All I do know is that Jebediah Kerman has gone plaid over here. And for somebody who's, a rocket extraordinaire, he sure does seem to be blacking out a lot. It's rather peculiar to say the least. He can't seem to handle his lunch in an airplane. You put him in a rocket that's, putting 9 or 10 G's on him and he's perfectly fine with it. You put him in an airplane, all of a sudden he's blacked out. And so let's I don't know if we're far enough or not. We may be good to start turning. I'm going to begin slowing down so I can make my turn. And I think the way I'm going to approach it is I'm going to bank a bit and then I'm going to yaw. And then maybe the cockpit view is best for landing. I haven't quite figured that out. And you can put it on the free camera or the chase camera. The chase camera is a bit disorienting. So I don't like to use that. It's on free originally, I think. And now I can't move my camera about. Let's attempt to move on over here without stalling out. As a flat, uncontrolled spin is not exactly what I have in mind. And I think maybe the best thing for us to do here is we're going north right now. We want to, without, causing too many problems, we want to turn, over here to the 90-degree marker, and this is usually where I begin to run into trouble. Because I really, I have no idea how far I am from the airstrip, and SAS keeps on wanting to push back. With that having been said, SAS is a lot better now than it used to be when it comes to planes. It's a lot better, period. I mean, it used to be quite a pain. Okay, so I need to, maybe consider doing a bit of a nosedive and throttling down as well. And getting myself in line with that landing strip is going to be difficult. No, I'm sure that anybody in the plane, if I were flying it right now, would be freaking out. I mean, I am heading straight towards the ground, and I'm not pulling any punches about. In fact, my rate of descent is probably a little bit too much. I need to do something about it. You can see I'm not lined up with the landing strip already, which indicates to me that maybe I decided to land a little bit too soon. And what's going on with my graphics? That's really weird. Although maybe this is a normal approach. I mean, we are only 400 meters above the ground. Landing gear down. Yeah. Kill engines. Level out. And pitch up. There goes my engine. And that is bound to end badly. Well, it's closer than I've been in a while. Let's make some changes to this. Because maybe I could design this thing a little bit better. First of all, what I want to do is I'm going to put these air intakes under the wings so they don't obscure my vision. And that may in fact give me a little bit of an upward component, as it appears to have done here, which means this thing might want to pitch up. Let's just take that off. Or maybe it just wants to pitch up regardless. In which case, I'll just sling them under the wings here. Control wasn't much of an issue, to be honest, although roll might be a problem for us. It looks a little bit more like a traditional fighter plane. I think maybe one thing we could do to improve this is find a way to improve the wheelbase a bit. And I'm not exactly sure how we might do that. Maybe we could, maybe what we could do here is we could, well, I want to stretch that out. Maybe what we could do, though, is we could, bring these out way back here. And I'm hoping maybe that'll give us a little bit more control. That does seem to be far enough back to where we don't, destroy our engine. However, let's make this Mark 2. However, it's not, entirely obvious what I could do to improve this to make it easier to land. Maybe I want this thing to have a slight incline to it. And so we'll do that. We'll give it a bit of a dihedral effect. So what we can do there then is we'll just give it like 5 degrees tilt. That may make it a little bit easier. It's not, I mean, it'll want to level out on its own, which, to be honest, is probably good for landing. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change my yaw on that as well, my tailplane, because I think 2 tailplanes is a bit much. It's I probably have more tailplanes, like too big of a tail for that. And so that's not going to help us much. Now, for me trying to work through this logically, it looks like my video's been corrupted somehow. And that looks like it may be a worse configuration that'll make us prone to tipping over. So what can I do about that? Well, maybe what I would do here then, I might put out some pontoons. I think that would probably be the best thing to do. That way we can have this guy out here hanging out on something. In which case we can actually, I think maybe even a structural fuselage is good here. We'll just put the we'll put the structural fuselage out here, and we'll attach these wheels in such a way that we get a little bit better of a base to land on. I think that will help tremendously. And we'll just do that right now. So, lock the steering. This is a bit of an issue because the the wheels are now not entirely balanced. However, what I'll do there is I will maybe give these a slight angle. In that case, let's just put this edge on. We're still in a bit of a predicament. It would be better for me to have, I think, this thing like this so it'll get a slight angle lifting off. Let's turn on our center of mass and center of lift. And that puts the, that puts the center of lift way ahead of us. What happens if we lower this? We'll put the wings down here. I think that'll help tremendously. Let's remove our fuel to find our sweet spot. In fact, let's redo this entirely. Let's pick another wing style. That wing style will probably help us in the long run, because we want lift out of this thing, but we don't want too much out of it. And so what we'll do is we'll just treat that as if it were flat, and we'll angle on up. Now the recommendation here is supposed to be that it looks ugly though. I don't really like that. It's what is the mass of that structural fuselage? Because I might improve it. So we don't really have any good structural parts here. And I think maybe what we'll do is we'll actually make this thing a little bit shorter. In which case, this gives us a little bit better of a result. We drain this fuel tank, what happens? I'll bet you nothing. Oh wait, that is the fuel tank drained. That actually surprises me a bit. This thing is pretty well balanced, it looks like. The center of mass does not shift too much. Well, if we're going to do that, then I reckon we should do something a little bit closer to this. Just take off that tailplane. Why don't we instead use a structural fuselage here and give ourselves more in the way of fuel? This thing probably will not be suitable for it won't be suitable for going into space because it's too light. But then again, we're not going for a real space plane today, are we? We're going for something a little bit different. We're gonna do this. We're gonna put this guy We might do 2 engines this time. That might make it absurdly powerful, but when we... These guys should drain at about the same rate. It'll make this guy incredibly fast. This, we're gonna lose control when we run out of fuel, so what we can do then is, we can do that. That dihedral angle is a bit much though, so, we'll tone it down. And fill these guys back up with fuel. And why don't we, while we're at it, why don't we put down some landing gear? Make this thing... I guess we do need air intakes as well. I know the hypersonic air intakes are a bit better, but I'm not really buying it. In fact, maybe I'm not going to use these delta wings. Maybe what I'll do instead is I'll use these guys here, and I'll put a nose cone on the back for dubious aerodynamic reasons. It's probably not going to help much at all, but it may. And what else can we do here? We're gonna put landing gear on there, right? So we'll do that. We'll put on these guys here. We want them to be relatively well spaced out. Let's see. Steering is locked. And what about these guys? Let's just turn this around. We don't want this guy pointing towards the ground, whatever the case is, and that's a little bit of a problem for us. What exactly is going on here? Now, this thing may have a little bit too much forward mass to be stable, and that's going to be another issue, like when we're moving forward. We'll disable the brakes on this, however, and we'll put on maybe these, maybe we'll put these regular wings on. That almost seems like it's not going to provide very much in the way of lift, though. I want these wider wings. And we'll just go ahead right now and we'll add on our flaps. And we may even get better, I'm thinking we'll get better roll control if we have dedicated control surfaces for roll, which is usually the recommendation. So we'll set these guys as roll surfaces. These will only be pitch, and we need a tailplane, so I'm going to put these delta wings on there. These guys actually will want to be moved forward a bit, it looks like. Let's Let's get this guy as close to the center of mass as possible. This thing will have a tendency to pitch up, which is not exactly what I want to do. I want this thing to, I want this thing to more or less, oops, wrong one. That's level. I want this thing to have a slight propensity to move forward. It looks like the problem is that our center of mass is lifting. Oh, why don't we'll sacrifice a little bit in the way of control here. That's still, this could end very badly, in my opinion. We'll just have to see. And of course, Jebediah's gone pink. But yeah, at any rate, whatever the issue is with my video settings, we'll try an in-cockpit liftoff now. Because I'm actually fairly convinced that that's not going to be too terribly bad. I just have to make sure that I don't drift, as I'm doing now. And that was no good. I think I was right about my center of mass being a little bit too high up. But you see, if I put him down here, the trouble is going to be that this thing is going to be pointed down now. Which means I'm going to have to splay my landing gear. Well, perhaps it's... I don't really want to do splayed landing gear. I mean, that's a little bit too, that can cause control problems on its own. If I move this thing down just a little bit, maybe we'll be okay. We definitely don't want to splay the front landing gear. Or maybe I'm just being an idiot about this. Maybe what I need to do is something along these lines. That may end up working way better. So let's give that a shot. And before I do that, let me make this a yaw surface. I'm hoping that this thing will be a little bit easier to land. I think part of the reason I started drifting so much is because my landing gear was splayed. That does make the plane very difficult to steer. So SAS is on. Throttle is all the way down. And the thing we're not supposed to block is blocked. So let's get the show on the road. Let's try not to drift too much this time. It's hard to tell if we're drifting or not. I think we're very, very slightly veering to the, to the right, but that's okay because, you know, we're now airborne. And I believe, aside from that being insanely fast, we're actually doing pretty good on resources too. I'm not quite sure how much Delta V this thing has, but you know, we're doing pretty good on altitude. Um, or maybe we're actually doing pretty poorly on altitude. We're barely off the ground. Now I'm oscillating for some reason. I don't. That's a dihedral effect, I think. Wanting to keep me stable. And I bet you this thing is not going to want to turn worth a damn either. However, we can do some tests here. We do have a fair amount of, or we do have a fair amount of, ability to climb here. And now we're several thousand feet. Let's pitch over some. That actually works quite well. I'm a little bit surprised. This may be just what it takes in order for us to be able to turn. Let's try a more aggressive turn. This is too aggressive of a turn is likely to make us spin out. We're gonna try and get to 270 up here. And let's get pointed over here. Man, this thing is fast. Maybe part of my control issues had to do with the fact that this thing just isn't flying very fast at all. Well, we should be more or less level at this point. And We're we're fairly stable. Altitude is dropping very slightly, but I'm okay with that. This thing is actually quite maneuverable in my opinion. This is probably the most maneuverable plane I've ever made. Which is kind of weird because that shouldn't be the case. The wings are rather low. That probably has something to do with it. And to be fair, we do have the engines running. Let's try a barrel roll. Do a barrel roll. That did take us very slightly off course. That appears to be the sweet spot for altitude. And cruising at 4K is not bad at all. Let's look and see what's outside this window here. In fact, I think it's about time for us to consider landing. If we land, I'll actually consider that a bit of an accomplishment, to tell you the truth, because that's the one thing I've found it very difficult to do. I mean, doing a hard turn in this thing is still... It's still incredibly difficult, but... Then again, like I said, I'm probably flying this thing too aggressively. So, yeah, I'm beginning to lose control here. Maybe I ought to level out just a little bit. Well, there's our runway. I just need to get this thing more or less centered. And we'll cut down our engines a bit. Maybe to half thrust. My gear's still down? I don't think so. I think my gear is off. Yeah, I've entered into a flat spin. And I'm not quite sure how to recover from it, other than maybe to go upside down. Because what my plane is wanting to do right now is because I put that dihedral angle on it. It's wanting to face that way. Oh man, that's no good. Well, that can be no good. And I think we'll end it here. So, I guess I'll work on this a little bit, see if maybe I can find a way to make this fly a little bit better. But until then, this has been Thy Lord Root, and I hope that you've enjoyed the show.